Bashar al-Assad, born September 11, 1965, is a Syrian politician and former military officer who served as the 19th president of Syria from July 2000 until his overthrow in December 2024. As president, Assad was the commander-in-chief of the Syrian armed forces and the secretary-general of the Central Command of the Arab Socialist Baath Party. He was the son of Hafez al-Assad, who was the president from 1971 until his death in 2000. Born and raised in Damascus, Assad graduated from the Medical School of Damascus University in 1988 and began to work as a doctor in the Syrian army. 4 years later, he attended postgraduate studies at the Western Eye Hospital in London, specialising in ophthalmology. In 1994, after his elder brother Basil al-Assad died in a car accident, Assad was recalled to Syria to take over Basil's role as heir apparent. Assad entered the military academy, taking charge of the Syrian occupation of Lebanon in 1998. On July 17, 2000, Assad became president, succeeding his father, who died on June 10, 2000. A series of crackdowns in 2001-02 ended the Damascus Spring, a period of cultural and political activism marked by calls for transparency and democracy. Although Assad inherited the power structures and personality cult nurtured by his father, he lacked the loyalty received by his father and faced rising discontent against his rule. As a result, many members of the old guard resigned or were purged, and the political inner circle were replaced by staunch loyalists from Alawite clans. Assad's early economic liberalization programs worsened inequalities and centralized the socio-political power of the loyalist Damascene elite of the Assad family, alienating the Syrian rural population, urban working classes, businessmen, industrialists, and people from once traditional Baath strongholds. The Cedar Revolution in Lebanon in February 2005, triggered by the assassination of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, forced Assad to end the Syrian occupation of Lebanon. Academics and analysts characterized Assad's presidency as a highly personalist dictatorship, which governed Syria as a totalitarian police state and was marked by numerous human rights violations and severe repression. While the Assad government describes itself as secular, various political scientists and observers noted that his regime exploited sectarian tensions in the country. Assad's first decade in power was marked by intense censorship, summary executions, forced disappearances, discrimination against ethnic minorities, and extensive surveillance by the Ba'athist secret police. In 2011, the United States, European Union, and majority of the Arab League called for Assad to resign following the crackdown on Arab Spring protesters during the events of the Syrian Revolution, which led to the Syrian civil war. The civil war has killed around 580,000 people, of which a minimum of 306,000 deaths are non-combatant. According to the Syrian Network for Human Rights, pro-Assad forces caused more than 90% of those civilian deaths. The Assad government perpetrated numerous war crimes during the course of the Syrian civil war, and Assad's army, the Syrian Arab Armed Forces, has also carried out several attacks with chemical weapons. The deadliest chemical attack was a sarin gas strike in Ghouta on August 21, 2013, which killed between 281 and 1,729 people. In December 2013, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Navi Pillay stated that findings from an inquiry by the UN implicated Assad in war crimes. Investigations by the OPCW on Joint Investigative Mechanism and OPCW on IIT concluded, respectively, that the Assad government was responsible for the 2017 Khan Shaykhun sarin attack and 2018 Doma chemical attack. In June 2014, the American Syrian Accountability Project included Assad on a list of war crimes indictments of government officials and sent it to the International Criminal Court. In 2023, Canada and the Netherlands filed a joint lawsuit at the International Court of Justice accusing the Assad government of infringing UN Convention Against Torture. On November 15, 2023, France issued an arrest warrant against Assad over the use of banned chemical weapons against civilians in Syria. Assad has categorically denied the allegations of these charges and has accused foreign countries, especially the United States, of attempting regime change. In November 2024, a coalition of Syrian rebels mounted several offensives against the country with the intention of ousting Assad. On December 7, 2024, it was widely reported that the Assad regime had collapsed and Assad fled the country as rebels took over Damascus during their lightning-quick campaign across Syria. Reuters claims two Syrian sources say that there is a high chance that Assad died in a plane crash. Bashar al-Assad was born in Damascus on September 11, 1965, as the second son and third child of Anisa Makhlouf and Hafez al-Assad. Al-Assad in Arabic means the lion. Assad's paternal grandfather, Ali Suleiman al-Assad, had managed to change his status from peasant to minor notable and, to reflect this, in 1927 he had changed the family name from Usher, meaning savage, to al-Assad. The Assads are of Alawite origin. Assad's father, Hafez al-Assad, was born to an impoverished rural family of Alawite background and rose through the Ba'ath party ranks to take control of the Syrian branch of the party in the corrective movement, culminating in his rise to the Syrian presidency. Hafez promoted his supporters within the Ba'ath party, many of whom were also of Alawite background. After the revolution, Alawite strongmen were installed while Sunnis, Druze, and Ismailis were removed from the army and Ba'ath party. Hafez al-Assad's 30-year military rule witnessed the transformation of Syria into a dynastic dictatorship. The new political system was led by the Ba'ath party elites dominated by the Alawites, who were fervently loyal to the Assad family and controlled the military, security forces and secret police. The younger Assad had 5 siblings, 3 of whom are deceased. A sister named Bashar died in infancy. Assad's youngest brother, Mahd, was not a public figure and little is known about him other than he was intellectually disabled and died in 2009 after a long illness. Unlike his brothers Basil and Mar, and second sister, also named Bushra, Bashar was quiet, reserved and lacked interest in politics or the military. The Assad children reportedly rarely saw their father and Bashar later stated that he only entered his father's office once while he was president. He was described as soft-spoken and according to a university friend, he was timid, avoided eye contact and spoke in a low voice. Assad received his primary and secondary education in the Arab-French Al-Hurriya school in Damascus. In 1982, he graduated from high school and then studied medicine at Damascus University. In 1988, Assad graduated from medical school and began working as an army doctor at the Tishrin military hospital on the outskirts of Damascus. 4 years later, he settled in London to start postgraduate training in ophthalmology at the Western Eye Hospital. He was described as a geeky IT guy during his time in London. Bashar had few political aspirations and his father had been grooming Bashar's older brother Basil as the future president. However, he died in a car accident in 1994 and Bashar was recalled to the Syrian army shortly thereafter. State propaganda soon began elevating Bashar's public imagery as the hope of the masses to prepare him as the next patriarch in charge of Syria, to continue the rule of the Assad dynasty. Soon after the death of Basil, Hafez al-Assad decided to make Bashar the new heir apparent. Over the next 6.5 years, until his death in 2000, Hafez prepared Bashar for taking over power. General Bajat Suleiman, an officer in the defense companies, was entrusted with overseeing preparations for a smooth transition, which were made on 3 levels. First, support was built up for Bashar in the military and security apparatus. Second, Bashar's image was established with the public. And lastly, Bashar was familiarized with the mechanisms of running the country. To establish his credentials in the military, Bashar entered the military academy at Homs in 1994 and was propelled through the ranks to become a colonel of the elite Syrian Republican Guard in January 1999. To establish a power base for Bashar in the military, old divisional commanders were pushed into retirement, and new, young, Alawite officers with loyalties to him took their place. In 1998, Bashar took charge of Syria's Lebanon file, which had since the 1970s been handled by Vice President Abdul Halim Khattam, who had until then been a potential contender for president. By taking charge of Syrian affairs in Lebanon, Bashar was able to push Khattam aside and establish his own power base in Lebanon. In the same year, after minor consultation with Lebanese politicians, Bashar installed Emil Lahad, a loyal ally of his, as the president of Lebanon and pushed former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri aside, by not placing his political weight behind his nomination as prime minister. To further weaken the old Syrian order in Lebanon, Bashar replaced the long-serving de facto Syrian High Commissioner of Lebanon, Ghazi Kanaan, with Rustam Ghazali. Parallel to his military career, Bashar was engaged in public affairs. He was granted wide powers and became head of the Bureau to receive complaints and appeals of citizens, and led a campaign against corruption. As a result of this campaign, many of Bashar's potential rivals for president were put on trial for corruption. Bashar also became the president of the Syrian Computer Society and helped to introduce the Internet in Syria, which aided his image as a modernizer and reformer. Ba'athist loyalists in the party, military and the Alawite sect were supportive of Bashar al-Assad, enabling him to become his father's successor. After the death of Hafez al-Assad on June 10, 2000, the constitution of Syria was amended. The minimum age requirement for the presidency was lowered from 40 to 34, which was Bashar's age at the time. Assad contested as the only candidate and subsequently confirmed president on July 10, 2000, with 97.29% support for his leadership. In line with his role as president of Syria, he was also appointed the commander-in-chief of the Syrian Armed Forces and regional secretary of the Ba'ath Party. A series of state elections have since been held regularly every 7 years, which Assad won with overwhelming majority of votes. The elections are unanimously regarded by independent observers as a sham process and boycotted by the opposition. The last two elections, held in 2014 and 2021, were conducted only in areas controlled by the Syrian government during the country's ongoing civil war and condemned by the United Nations. Immediately after he took office, a reform movement known as Damascus Spring, led by writers, intellectuals, dissidents, cultural activists, etc., made cautious advances, which led to the shutdown of Meza prison and the declaration of a wide-ranging amnesty releasing hundreds of Muslim Brotherhood-affiliated political prisoners. However, security crackdowns commenced again within the year, turning it into the Damascus winter. Hundreds of intellectuals were arrested, targeted, exiled, or sent to prison, and the state of emergency was continued. The early concessions were rolled back to tighten authoritarian control, censorship was increased, and the Damascus Spring movement was banned under the pretext of national unity and stability. The regime's policy of a social market economy became a symbol of corruption, as Assad loyalists became its sole beneficiaries. Several discussion forums were shut down and many intellectuals were abducted by the Mukhabarat, tortured and killed. Many analysts believe that initial promises of opening up were part of a government strategy to find Syrians who were not supportive of the new leadership. During a state visit by British Prime Minister Tony Blair to Syria in October 2001, Bashar publicly condemned the United States invasion of Afghanistan in a joint press conference, stating that we cannot accept what we see every day on our television screens, the killing of innocent civilians. There are hundreds dying every day. Assad also praised Palestinian militant groups as freedom fighters and criticized Israel and the Western world during the conference. British officials subsequently described Assad's political views as being more conciliatory in private, claiming that he criticized the September 11 attacks and accepted the legitimacy of the State of Israel. Following the September 11 attacks and during the early stages of the US-led war on terror, Syria had emerged as one of the CIA's most effective intelligence allies in the fight against al-Qaeda, with the quality and quantity of information from Syria having exceeded the agency's expectations. Syria closely cooperated with the CIA's detention and interrogation program of people deemed illegal enemy combatants, Syrian prisons were a major site of extraordinary rendition by the CIA of alleged al-Qaeda members, where they were tortured by Syrian interrogators on behalf of the CIA. According to a 2013 report by the Open Society Foundations, Syria was one of the most common destinations for rendered suspects under the CIA's program. On February 14, 2005, Rafik Hariri, the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, was assassinated in a massive truck bomb explosion in Beirut, killing 22 people. The Christian Science Monitor reported that Syria was widely blamed for Hariri's murder. In the months leading to the assassination, relations between Hariri and Syrian President Bashar al-Assad plummeted amid an atmosphere of threats and intimidation. Bashar promoted his brother-in-law Asif Shokat, a key figure suspected of orchestrating the terrorist attack, as the chief of Syrian Military Intelligence Directorate immediately after Hariri's death. The killings caused massive uproar, triggering an intifada in Lebanon, and hundreds of thousands of protesters poured on the streets to demand total withdrawal of Syrian military forces. After mounting international pressure that called Syria to implement the UNSC Resolution 1559, Bashar al-Assad declared on March 5 that he would order the departure of Syrian soldiers. On March 14, 2005, more than 1 million Lebanese protesters, Muslims, Christians, and Druze, demonstrated in Beirut, marking the monthly anniversary of Hariri's murder. UN Resolution 1595, adopted on April 7, sent an international commission to investigate the assassination of Hariri. By May 5, 2005, United Nations had officially confirmed the total departure of all Syrian soldiers, ending the 29-year-old military occupation. The uprisings that occurred in these months came to be known as Lebanon's Independence Intifada or the Cedar Revolution. UN Investigation Commission's report published on October 20, 2005 revealed that high-ranking members of Syrian intelligence and Assad family had directly supervised the killing. The BBC reported in December 2005 that Damascus has strongly denied involvement in the car bomb which killed Hariri in February. On May 27, 2007, Assad was approved for another 7-year term in a referendum on his presidency, with 97.6% of the votes supporting his continued leadership. Opposition parties were not allowed in the country and Assad was the only candidate in the referendum. Syria's opposition parties under the umbrella of Damascus Declaration denounced the elections as illegitimate and part of the regime's strategy to sustain the totalitarian system. Elections in Syria are officially designated as the event of renewing the Pledge of Allegiance to the Assads, and voting is enforced as a compulsory duty for every citizen. Announcement of the results are followed by pro-government rallies conducted across the country extolling the regime, wherein citizens declare their devotion to the president and celebrate the virtues of the Assad dynasty. Syria began developing a covert nuclear weapons program with assistance of North Korea during the 2000s, but its suspected nuclear reactor was destroyed by the Israeli Air Force during Operation Outside the Box in September 2007. Protests in Syria began on January 26, 2011 following the Arab Spring protests that called for political reforms and the reinstatement of civil rights, as well as an end to the state of emergency which had been in place since 1963. One attempt at a day of rage was set for 4 to 5 February, though it ended uneventfully. Protests on 18 to 19 March were the largest to take place in Syria for decades, and the Syrian Authority responded with violence against its protesting citizens. In his first public response to the protests delivered on March 30, 2011, Assad blamed the unrest on conspiracies and accused the Syrian opposition and protesters of seditious fitna, towing the party line of framing the Ba'athist state as the victim of an international plot. He also derided the Arab Spring movement, and described those participating in the protests as germs and fifth columnists. The U.S. imposed limited sanctions against the Assad government in April 2011, followed by Barack Obama's executive order as of May 18, 2011 targeting Bashar Assad specifically and 6 other senior officials. On May 23, 2011, the EU foreign ministers agreed at a meeting in Brussels to add Assad and 9 other officials to a list affected by travel bans and asset freezes. On May 24, 2011, Canada imposed sanctions on Syrian leaders, including Assad. On June 20, in response to the demands of protesters and international pressure, Assad promised a national dialogue involving movement toward reform, new parliamentary elections, and greater freedoms. He also urged refugees to return home from Turkey, while assuring them amnesty and blaming all unrest on a small number of saboteurs. Duration, 42 seconds. 0:42 Hundreds of thousands of anti-Assad protesters parade the Syrian flag and shout the Arab Spring slogan Ash-Shaburat Iskatan Nizam, the people want to bring down the regime, in the Assis Square, during the siege of Hama, July 22, 2011. In July 2011, U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said Assad had lost legitimacy as president. On August 18, 2011, Barack Obama issued a written statement that urged Assad to step aside. In August, the cartoonist Ali Farzad, a critic of Assad's government, was attacked. Relatives of the humorist told media outlets that the attackers threatened to break Farzad's bones as a warning for him to stop drawing cartoons of government officials, particularly Assad. Farzad was hospitalized with fractures in both hands and blunt force trauma to the head. Since October 2011, Russia, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, repeatedly vetoed Western-sponsored draft resolutions in the UN Security Council that would have left open the possibility of UN sanctions, or even military intervention, against the Assad government. By the end of January 2012, it was reported by Reuters that over 5,000 civilians and protesters, including armed militants, had been killed by the Syrian army, security agents, and militia, Shabiha, while 1,100 people had been killed by terrorist armed forces. On January 10, 2012, Assad gave a speech in which he maintained the uprising was engineered by foreign countries and proclaimed that victory was near. He also said that the Arab League, by suspending Syria, revealed that it was no longer Arab. However, Assad also said the country would not close doors to an Arab-brokered solution if national sovereignty was respected. He also said a referendum on a new constitution could be held in March. On February 27, 2012, Syria claimed that a proposal that a new constitution be drafted received 90% support during the relevant referendum. The referendum introduced a 14-year cumulative term limit for the president of Syria. The referendum was pronounced meaningless by foreign nations including the US and Turkey. The EU announced fresh sanctions against key regime figures. In July 2012, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov denounced Western powers for what he said amounted to blackmail, thus provoking a civil war in Syria. On July 15, 2012, the International Committee of the Red Cross declared Syria to be in a state of civil war, as the nationwide death toll for all sides was reported to have neared 20,000. On January 6, 2013, Assad, in his first major speech since June, said that the conflict in his country was due to enemies outside of Syria who would go to hell and that they would be taught a lesson. However, he said that he was still open to a political solution, saying that failed attempts at a solution does not mean we are not interested in a political solution. In July 2014, Assad renewed his third term of presidency after voting process conducted in pro-regime territories which were boycotted by the opposition and condemned by the United Nations. According to Joshua Landis, he's, Assad, going to say, I am the state, I am Syria, and if the West wants access to Syrians, they have to come through me. After the fall of 4 military bases in September 2014, which were the last government footholds in the Raqqa Governorate, Assad received significant criticism from his allied base of support. This included remarks made by Duraid al-Assad, cousin of Bashar al-Assad, demanding the resignation of the Syrian defense minister, Fat Jassem al-Faraj, following the massacre by the Islamic State of hundreds of government troops captured after the IS victory at Tabqa Air Base. This was shortly followed by Alawite protests in Homs demanding the resignation of the governor, and the dismissal of Assad's cousin Hafez Makhluk from his security position, leading to his subsequent exile to Belarus. Growing resentment towards Assad among Alawites was fueled by the disproportionate number of soldiers killed in fighting hailing from Alawite areas, a sense that the Assad regime has abandoned them, as well as the failing economic situation. Figures close to Assad began voicing concerns regarding the likelihood of its survival, with one saying in late 2014, "I don't see the current situation as sustainable. I think Damascus will collapse at some point." In 2015, several members of the Assad family died in Latakia under unclear circumstances. On March 14, an influential cousin of Assad and founder of the Shabiha, Mohammad Tawfiq al-Assad, was assassinated with 5 bullets to the head in a dispute over influence in Kardaha, the ancestral home of the Assad family. In April 2015, Assad ordered the arrest of his cousin Munthar al-Assad in Al-Zira, Latakia. It remains unclear whether the arrest was due to actual crimes. After a string of government defeats in northern and southern Syria, analysts noted growing government instability coupled with continued waning support for the Assad government among its core Alawite base of support, and that there were increasing reports of Assad relatives, Alawites, and businessmen fleeing Damascus for Latakia and foreign countries. Intelligence chief Ali Mamluk was placed under house arrest sometime in April and stood accused of plotting with Assad's exiled uncle Rafat al-Assad to replace Bashar as president. Further high-profile deaths included the commanders of the 4th Armored Division, the Belly Military Air Base, the Army's Special Forces, and of the 1st Armored Division, with an errant airstrike during the Palmyra offensive killing 2 officers who were reportedly related to Assad. On September 4, 2015, when prospects of Assad's survival looked bleak, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Russia was providing the Assad government with sufficiently serious help, with both logistical and military support. Shortly after the start of direct military intervention by Russia on September 30, 2015, at the formal request of the Syrian government, Putin stated the military operation had been thoroughly prepared in advance and defined Russia's goal in Syria as stabilizing the legitimate power in Syria and creating the conditions for political compromise. Putin's intervention saved the Assad regime at a time when it was on the verge of a looming collapse. It also enabled Moscow to achieve its key geostrategic objectives, such as total control of Syrian airspace, naval bases that granted permanent martial reach across the eastern Mediterranean, and easier access to intervene in Libya. In November 2015, Assad reiterated that a diplomatic process to bring the country's civil war to an end could not begin while it was occupied by terrorists, although it was considered by BBC News to be unclear whether he meant only ISIL or Western-supported rebels as well. On November 22, Assad said that within 2 months of its air campaign Russia had achieved more in its fight against ISIL than the US-led coalition had achieved in a year. In an interview with Czech television on December 1, he said that the leaders who demanded his resignation were of no interest to him, as nobody takes them seriously because they are shallow and controlled by the United States. At the end of December 2015, senior U.S. officials privately admitted that Russia had achieved its central goal of stabilizing Syria and, with the expenses relatively low, could sustain the operation at this level for years to come. In December 2015, Putin stated that Russia was supporting Assad's forces and was ready to back anti-Assad rebels in a joint fight against IS. On January 22, 2016, the Financial Times, citing anonymous senior Western intelligence officials, claimed that Russian General Igor Sergun, the director of GRU, the main intelligence directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, had shortly before his sudden death on January 3, 2016 been sent to Damascus with a message from Vladimir Putin asking that President Assad step aside. The Financial Times report was denied by Putin's spokesman. It was reported in December 2016 that Assad's forces had retaken half of rebel-held Aleppo, ending a 6-year stalemate in the city. On December 15, as it was reported government forces were on the brink of retaking all of Aleppo, a turning point in the civil war, Assad celebrated the liberation of the city, and stated, "History is being written by every Syrian citizen." After the election of Donald Trump, the priority of the U.S. concerning Assad was unlike the priority of the Obama administration, and in March 2017, U.S. Ambassador to the UN Nikki Haley stated the U.S. was no longer focused on getting Assad out, but this position changed in the wake of the 2017 Khan Sheikhoun chemical attack. Following the missile strikes on a Syrian airbase on the orders of President Trump, Assad's spokesperson described the U.S. behavior as unjust and arrogant aggression and stated that the missile strikes do not change the deep policies of the Syrian government. President Assad also told the agence France Presse that Syria's military had given up all its chemical weapons in 2013, and would not have used them if they still retained any, and stated that the chemical attack was a 100% fabrication used to justify a U.S. airstrike. In June 2017, Russian President Putin said Assad didn't use the chemical weapons and that the chemical attack was done by people who wanted to blame him for that. UN and international chemical weapons inspectors from the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, found the attack was the work of the Assad regime. On November 7, 2017, the Syrian government announced that it had signed the Paris Climate Agreement. In May 2018, it recognized the independence of Russian-occupied separatist republics of Abkhazia and South Ossetia in Georgia, leading to backlash from the European Union, United States, Canada, and other countries. On August 30, 2020, the first Hussein Arnis government was formed, which included a new council of ministers. In the 2021 presidential elections held on May 26, Assad secured his fourth seven-year tenure, by winning 95.2% of the eligible votes. The elections were boycotted by the opposition and SDF, while the refugees and internally displaced citizens were disqualified to vote, enabling only 38% of Syrians to participate in the process. Independent international observers as well as representatives of Western countries described the elections as a farce. United Nations condemned the elections for directly violating Resolution 2254, and announced that it has no mandate. On August 10, 2021, the second Hussein Arnis government was formed. Under Assad, Syria became a strong supporter of the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine and was one of the 5 countries that opposed the UN General Assembly resolution denouncing the invasion, which called upon Russia to pull back its troops. 3 days prior to the invasion, Foreign Minister Faisal Miqdad was dispatched to Moscow to affirm Syria's recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk separatist republics. A day after the invasion, Bashar al-Assad praised the invasion as a correction of history and a restoration of balance in the global order after the fall of the Soviet Union in a phone call with Vladimir Putin. Syria became the first country after Russia to officially recognize the independence and sovereignty of the 2 breakaway regions in June 2022. On the 12th anniversary of beginning of the protests of Syrian revolution, Bashar al-Assad held a meeting with Vladimir Putin during an official visit to Russia. In a televised broadcast with Putin, Assad defended Russia's special military operation as a war against neo-Nazis and old Nazis of Ukraine. He recognized the Russian annexation of 4 Ukrainian oblasts and ratified the new Russian borders, claiming that the territories were historically Russian. Assad also urged Russia to expand its military presence in Syria by establishing new bases and deploying more boots on the ground, making its military role permanent. In March 2023, he visited the United Arab Emirates and met with UAE's President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. In May 2023, he attended the Arab League Summit in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, where he was welcomed by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. In September 2023, Assad attended the Asian Games opening ceremony in Hangzhou and met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. They announced the establishment of a China-Syria strategic partnership. In December 2024, the United States, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom urged for de-escalation in Syria as violence flared up once again. Rebel factions, led by the Islamist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, had taken control of Aleppo, prompting a retaliatory airstrike campaign by Syrian President Bashar Assad, supported by Russia. The strikes, which targeted population centers and several hospitals in rebel-held city of Idlib, resulted in at least 25 deaths, according to the White Helmets Rescue Group. The NATO countries issued a joint statement calling for the protection of civilians and critical infrastructure to prevent further displacement and ensure humanitarian access. They stressed the urgent need for a Syrian-led political solution, in accordance with United Nations Security Council Resolution 2254, which advocates for dialogue between the Syrian government and opposition forces. The rebel offensive, which had begun on November 27, 2024, continued its advance into Hama province following their capture of Aleppo. On December 4, 2024, fierce clashes erupted in Hama province as the Syrian army engaged Islamist-led insurgents in a bid to halt their advance on the key city of Hama. Government forces claimed to have launched a counter-offensive with air support, pushing back rebel factions, including Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, around 6 miles from the city. However, despite reinforcements, the rebels captured the city on December 5. The fighting led to widespread displacement, with nearly 50,000 people fleeing the area and over 600 casualties reported, including 104 civilians. On December 7, 2024, Assad fled the capital of Damascus. Assad speaks fluent English and basic conversational French, having studied at the Franco-Arab Al-Hurriya school in Damascus. In December 2000, Assad married Asma Akraz, a British citizen of Syrian origin from Acton, London. In 2001, Asma gave birth to their first child, a son named Hafez after the child's grandfather Hafez al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad's son Hafez graduated from Moscow State University in the summer of 2023 with a master's thesis in number theory. Their daughter Zian was born in 2003, followed by their second son Karim in 2004. In January 2013, Assad stated in an interview that his wife was pregnant. However, there were no later reports of them having a fourth child. Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite Muslim. Bashar performed the Hajj pilgrimage twice, in 1999 and in 2000. Assad's sister, Bushra al-Assad, and mother, Anisa Makhlouf, left Syria in 2012 and 2013, respectively, to live in the United Arab Emirates. Makhlouf died in Damascus in 2016. Thank you for watching this video.